So,
Sounds good.
perfect. All right. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Scene Snob interviews. And I am, of course, your host, Mick Manhattan, the Scene Snob. Thank you again for joining us. I have a very special guest with me here today, Mr. Dustin Ferguson, who is the director of direct-to-video, straight-to-video horror movies of the 90s. I got to check out this documentary. It just came out 2 weeks ago. And man, the nostalgia is real. It just hit me. It hit me so hard to my days in the video store all the way till now. And welcome to the show, Dustin. Thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you for having me. The honor's mine. I appreciate it.
I'm so happy to watch this movie. There were so many movies I forgot about that you showed that, just these golden, direct-to-video movies that, man, I started writing them all down as I'm going, and I'm like, I'm going to revisit this and this, and I was just so thankful.
That's the purpose of it, for sure.
Absolutely. And so obviously you're a video store kid.
Yeah.
And here at the Scene Snobs, we pride ourselves on that. A lot of our hosts and stuff, we talk about it all the time. Those days in the video store of just looking at the box art and, appreciating all the good horror movies and sci-fi and such. But for you, how did this get started? Where did you work in a video store? Did you want to, where did direct-to-video come from?
Okay, to backtrack a little bit, I'm a big horror fan. I grew up collecting horror movies and the video store era, the late 80s, early 90s. And I actually went to college to open a video store, but this was in the early 2000s. And so all the video stores obviously were going out of business then. So I ended up just managing different pizza places and using my business management degree for that. And then I started making movies on the side with some coworkers. And then obviously, the film career blew up. And then actually in 2017, everything kind of came full circle because I opened a video store. Because at that point it was nostalgic. It was sort of like record shops where it was like making a comeback. And so I had this like crazy horror section and had a video store for about 11 months. And it started just out as my own movies. My whole collection is what started the store. And then it grew into like a legit store. And I actually sold the store to my regular customer, Mike Reeb, so I could move out to California and do films full time, which of course led to direct-to-video last year.
That is so awesome. And where is the video store? Just so that way anybody can go check it out.
It's in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's called Old School Video.
That's awesome. I love it. And you're out in California now. That used to be my old stomping grounds out in LA. How do you like it versus being in Nebraska?
I love it. What a lot of people associate with moving to California is LA, and I live actually about an hour south of there. I live in Riverside County, where it's just a lot calmer, more peaceful, because I do most of my work from home. And obviously during COVID times, So I only have to go to LA maybe once or twice a month. So it's sort of like the perfect spot for me. Like, it's really affordable. It's really a nice area to live in. And I'm close to everything I want, as far as the beach, the mountains, Hollywood, just about anything.
Absolutely. Riverside is gorgeous. And for you, so you get out to you get out to California, and I mean, you're a movie lover, you appreciate the direct-to-video titles. How did you start putting the whole project together? Reaching out to the different, because you have so many wonderful stars in your movie who come on and talk about like some of the great movies. To name a few before we get started, like you have Clint Howard, Lloyd Kaufman, Tiffany Shepis, Kelly Maroney, Brink Stevens, Jim Wynorski. I mean, the list kind of goes on for, quite a bit, and you get in depth with all of them, and it's really wonderful. And it's really exciting to see the enthusiasm in their face talking about it.
Yeah. It's funny because surprisingly, the documentary was pretty easy for me to assemble because all of those people involved were people I'd actually worked with previously. I'm up to, I think, 111 or 112 movies at this point in my career. So over the last 3 years of living in California, I've met all of them previously and worked with them in some way. And so it was easy for me to reach out to them because for them, it was sort of like a reunion. Like the big day of filming we had that we did in an office, where I had like the same background through a lot of it. All of that was done like on the same 2 days. And so they were kind of overlapping interviews and running into each other out in the hall and stuff. And it was a lot of fun. And I think that translated into the documentary. Everybody was in a really good mood when we did it and felt nostalgic, and we're dishing up memories with each other before the interviews. And I think it just really shows. And I think that is something I didn't really anticipate, because, you going into it, you have a certain idea what it's going to be. And I think 90s direct-to-video films have a certain feel about them. And I think that it sort of naturally felt that way with this, just because of the people that were involved and the time that we did it and how they all got to kind of run into each other previously. And I think it really shows for the fans.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can just, you can tell again with their enthusiasm and how they're opening up. Like, you guys got along well those days while you're recording, definitely.
Well, and I ask the kind of questions a lot of people don't ask. It's like, we all hear the same questions in interviews, and and it's sort of like, we want to know the real truth. I want to know what was really going on the set of this one day. Like, what was up with that? And we got to those sort of questions. And I think that's what makes it stick out, when there's a lot of other documentaries that are similar coming out right now.
That's actually, I'm really glad you said that, because I was comparing it to a lot of the documentaries that are coming out, and it is very different. One of the things I said to you in the beginning of this is, like, there's so many titles that, you covered in your film that I was just like, wow, I completely forgot about that. And I loved that growing up, like Doll Man versus Demonic Toys. I was like, I completely forgot that existed. And it's such a fun movie.
I love that movie. I personally love that movie.
And it's just like, and again, the way you kind of cut everything together, it's just, there's so much joy in it. You can tell, and not to put any of the other documentaries down, because they've all been pretty fantastic. But like In the Search of Darkness, this is great, grandiose tribute to 80s horror movies, but it doesn't go as in depth, and it doesn't seem like there's anything more than like things we have heard before, but maybe from a different perspective. But whereas with your documentary, to gush a little bit, if I can, do you hear those inside stories? Like, I love Pumpkinhead 2. And when are you ever going to hear about Pumpkinhead 2 let alone that much detail in a documentary? You really aren't. So, I mean, thank you for that, first of all.
No, I'm glad to hear that, because those are the same movies that mean a lot to me. That's what I grew up in. And obviously everyone agrees that's seen this, that it just doesn't get enough love. People don't talk about those movies anymore. And I thought that it was just really important to put those in the spotlight and really hear from these people, because it is really a forgotten era. It's like things from the 80s kind of changed in the 90s. We had the direct to video horror of the 90s, but then it was quickly swept off the map when Scream came out in 96. And it's sort of like everyone forgot, like you said, about Doll Man versus Demonic Toys and Dolly Dearest and Ice Cream Man. It's like you bring them up now and people are like, oh yeah. And it's this whole era that I think people need to remember.
Yeah, and the nice part about it is, like, companies like Vinegar Syndrome and Shout Factory and such are bringing them back kind of into fruition with Blu-ray, but I don't think it's moving fast enough, and I don't think they're delving deep enough. Like the movies that you cover in your documentary, like they should come back out. I think that would be a great way to go about it. You don't really see them streaming anywhere. Let's get them. No. And that's sad. It's sad to feel like you're going to lose that in some way, but not with your documentary. With your documentary, we can go remember and go out and search again.
Oh yeah, kind of like with everything I do, I'm big on the mood and the feeling it evokes, and I think that when you watch it with everything combined in it, you have that feeling, the video store feeling again. And that was my purpose, my sole purpose behind all the interviews and the clips and everything that's in it, was just when it's over, you have that nostalgic feeling again, and you want to go watch those movies.
Oh, absolutely. And I did, like I was telling you, I started writing things down. I'm like, I got to check this out, and just really go search it out. One thing I wanted to ask you as a director, because you had said you like 200, 300 movies that you've done, and just from the directing standpoint, since 2014, you worked on a ton of movies. Like I mean, I don't think I can even count them all. And you've really put some a lot of content out there. How do you do so much in such a little amount of time? I guess. I mean, that's only 6 years or so. And B, what's the what made you go from like narratives to doing a documentary? to tell the story? Like, was there anything that really pushed you in one way or the other?
Well, I only ever started making movies, horror movies specifically, because I'm a fan. And so people that watch my movies see the influence in them. I made a franchise called Meat Hook Massacre, and it's obvious what the influence is, and so that's just kind of what I've always been about. And I think that it's not a big step for me to make something informative about horror either, because I've always been about educating my friends and the people I know about horror and the influences in my life and what's behind the movies I make. And so, like I mentioned before, with the context I've made working on so many films, it really was just a natural progression for me to do something like this. I find it easy, and it's not my first documentary either. I'm doing a follow-up. I just did a follow-up to it called Stale Popcorn and Sticky Floors. And then we're starting Now to the Faint of Heart, which is, going to kind of be like the trilogy of them.
Oh, that's awesome. That's fantastic. I would say if you ever decide to spawn off and do like martial arts films or action film, directly martial arts or action, I'd be in on that too, or sci-fi or fantasy, like, because there's some fun stuff down, across the board coming out direct to video back in the 90s. It really.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely. There's so much out there to unearth. And kind of going back to your initial part of the question, like, I do so much, obviously, it's not out of the question that I would do that in a couple of years from now. And the reason, it's funny because I get a lot of comments on social media. People are like, when do you sleep? Like, how are you doing this? Like, what's going on? And it's funny because for me, like right now, I'm just sitting around today doing interviews. Like I'm good at managing my time. I'm an efficient worker. I used to get in trouble at a lot of my regular jobs for being the first person done because people thought that I was cutting corners. And it's just because of my efficiency and the way that I plan. And so when I started doing films, I started as an editor. And I think that if you're going to be directing movies, it helps to have that sort of knowledge because you don't waste time. You get what you need. You kind of can plan in your head, for it. And a big part of making movies for me is the editing. So often on the same day I shoot, I go home and edit that footage. Because we only film for like 2-3 hours that day. And so it's easy to just go home quick and put the footage together. And then if you're doing that every day you film, on the last day of filming, you put that last bit of footage together and you have a rough cut already. And I've gotten to the point now where I have a whole crew of people. I've got a sound guy that as soon as I have the rough cut done, I just pass it on to him and he does the sound. And then basically my work's done. I can go on to the next project. And having multiple projects going on at once, like typically I have anywhere from 3 to 6 or 7 movies going on at once. I think that really for me is what keeps it going because I can bounce around between the two. You don't get burnt out on one project. A lot of people will go shoot a movie. It takes them 6 months to shoot the movie, and then it takes them 6 months to edit it because they want to relax and get away from it for a while. And I think that when you have all these different things, it's like, well, I'm sick of this. I'm going to go work on that. And then everything just kind of eventually all gets done at the same time.
Nice. And so for that, then, how is this year of the apocalypse? Has it slowed you down at all, or has it? Where is your creativity gone to do this stuff, like to keep that busy?
Well, like with many people, it was totally unpredictable because we had usually, because I put so much out, I planned like the whole next year in advance. So at the end of last year, I had all of 2020 mapped out. We had posters for the movies we were going to do. All this stuff was in the works. And then around March, after like our second movie, COVID hit, and things changed. And I thought that, what am I going to do? Like, I can't make all these movies now. And how am I going to survive? Because this is what I do full time. I was like, I can do editing gigs and stuff like that, but that only goes so far. And something just sort of happened when I kind of got the idea about doing like a COVID type of movie with people that could self-film themselves. And so we did 5G Zombies, which was, I've always been about exploitation, and there was all the headlines about the 5G service and the conspiracies. So I'm like, well, let's make a movie where people are trying to survive an apocalypse. This would be easy to do. COVID's going on. No one's outside. It looks like an apocalypse. All these people can film themselves and narrate like they're surviving it and everything. And so we did that and put it together, and it kind of went viral. And so shortly after that, the murder hornets were on the headlines. And I was just like, man, I should do a follow-up and have it have murder hornets. So I did, and we kind of did it the same way where we had real minimal crew. Like it was just me and 1 or 2 other people most times, and everybody else self-filmed just attack scenes being attacked by CGI hornets. And so the whole thing, honestly, was made in like $5. Like it was cheap. And we made it and put it out, and again, it was a hit. And then so suddenly I'm making all these crazy movies. Like we just did Ebola Rex, and we did Arachnado, and I just shot an Amityville movie. And I've found that this year has been my most productive year. I originally had 10 movies planned for this year, and actually it's turning out to be 16.
That is awesome. That's fantastic. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. It's crazy.
It is. I mean, I can't imagine it is, but you can tell, like, again, like that joy bleeds through, and I can tell you're excited about what you do. So, you know, it's filmmaking. I used to be a filmmaker. I used to be a producer, and you know, for me, it was always like, oh, I cannot wait to get off set, but I couldn't wait to get back the next day either. Like, it was just that over time. May tire you out, but you still like love it. It's a calling for sure.
So I thrive off of it. I mean, it is my drug. It's what I thrive every day. I wake up with, and I tell everybody this, I always have like a sense of urgency, because, you know, you go through a lot in life and it makes you think about things, and, you know, every day could be your last. And I think there's a lot of people that spend their time just not doing much. And I feel like the point of life is to succeed and to follow your dreams. Like, what else is there if there's not that? And so it's so easy for me to wake up and be excited and work hard on stuff because I see the reward of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so well put. That's such a great thing. And I have a lot of filmmakers watch this. So, you know, it's always good, I think, for other filmmakers to say things like that to kind of inspire some hope of, you know, like what they're getting into, you know. So thank you for that.
No, for sure.
And you know, I gotta give you a lot of credit for doing the work too, because there's a lot, you know, I tell filmmakers all the time, it's like, just, you gotta do the work. You gotta be creative, but you got to do it. You have to just.
That's what it boils down to, is the follow through. I mean, a lot of people can start projects or kind of get the ball rolling, but it's about seeing it through, getting it completed, getting it released, and then learning from that experience and moving on to the next one.
Exactly. Well, perfectly put. And but for you, like, having kind of a banner year with that many movies during a time where nothing or very little at least is getting done, I have found during this 2020 that I'm finding I don't like the fact that people are saying that there's no new content. This sucks. No, there's no new blockbusters coming out, and I'm okay with that, because I found a lot of gems that would probably get lost in any normal year, and more and more as they go. And
well, you know, people don't really realize that we had the best, most grisliest slasher films in the 80s, you know, as a result of the politics and the environment at the time. Mm-hmm. And I think that COVID is going to be, it's just like a war, you know, that's going on, where the people feel it and it's making them feel a certain way and desire a certain thing. And I think that horror is strong right now. And I think that especially it's like an opportunity for the indie filmmakers. And that's what I've been screaming to everybody. It's just like, Hollywood shut down. So it's really up to us, you know, like during World War II, the only escape people had from reality was going to the movie theater. Like, that's the only thing people had still, was just some sort of escape of entertainment. And I'm making headlines because I'm the only person doing it. Like, you just got to create right now. You know, it's the time to really do it, because everything I'm doing now is going to last for forever.
It really, and it is. And again, like, to put out almost 60 movies this year that's a big help from an indie world, from an indie perspective, you know, in a world where we can't even get movies that are already filmed by the big studios to come out. Then push back. So I found through my talks and you know, interviews and things like that I'm finding more and more that people are just like getting tired. They're like, all right, if you're going to keep pushing your movies back, then maybe we need an indie, not resurgence, but like kind of takeover, if you will.
Right.
Right. And one thing I kind of equate this to when I'm talking to friends, the movies that I have been finding that have been coming out. Now they're all on streaming, of course, but it's almost like being at a video store when you were young and just, I'm going to give this a try because there's nothing else and this is new. So I'm going to give this a try. And the streaming services have actually gotten easier to maneuver, in my opinion, because you're just like, all right, I don't want to watch the same thing over and over again. Movie theaters that are open are only showing old movies that I've seen 1,000 times. You know, I'm going to go to this indie hit. So how have you, you know, with your projects, how have you felt about that coming out, like with the streaming?
Oh, it's definitely worked in my favor as an indie director. Like, I had a huge resurgence. Like, right around the time this happened, I kind of got a fire under my ass to launch my DVD store. You know, I'm like, I only had a streaming service at that point, which is good for times like this. But I'm like, you know, people are buying movies now. There's not much else to do. And I have all this content. Like, I get so wrapped up in the movies I do. I don't have a lot of time to then, once they're done, I kind of just move on to the next one. And sometimes I realize I'm like, I got 50 movies. I should probably put those out. You know, like it's like, I just finally, you know, did that, and it's really been what's been my bread and butter. It's what's keeping me going, you know, is because people are at home and they're watching movies and they're discovering new things. I've had this huge boost, I think, since I started doing these pandemic movies, you know, with people discovering my work, and it's really been beneficial for me.
So, what would you say to other indie filmmakers and how to maneuver the streaming world? You know, for you, how does it work? Like, is there any pointers you would give, or you know, just advice in general?
I think that we're still living in like a social media age, and so a lot of it's about branding. A lot of people, I think, have the assumption that they've made it if they get their movie on Amazon. But the thing is, like, it's notorious that Amazon doesn't pay anything. Like, you get a quarter of a penny or something per hour streamed. Is just ridiculous. And so I think that what really, just like the films, having an independent service that's going to give you a higher percentage, it may be more niche, but you have more control over it. And if you're good with your branding, it doesn't matter how niche it is, because it's big enough that you'll earn a living. And that's what I've done with my Vimeo service. You know, like, it's not a lot of people have that service or really understand it, but my fans specifically are discovering that's a good way to get access to all my stuff, and they're willing to learn it. And now that they do, they're there and they're paying for it every month.
That's very nice. And okay, so that's great. And I like Vimeo because it's pretty much anti-YouTube. You know, it's very
yeah.
different.
You put anything you want on it. There's no creative restrictions, and I make some weird movies sometimes, so it's good for me.
So, but for you, to kind of like, as a film fan, not just a filmmaker, what is streaming like? You hear a lot people are against streaming. Filmmakers are against streaming. I think a lot of it is just kind of a weird bias in a way. Like, I don't know that it is the future. It is here. It is what we're doing. So I collect, you know, my DVDs and things like that still, but streaming, I'm not turned off to it. Like, there's still something about it. It's still, since we don't have video stores, you kind of have that now to kind of fall back on and look for things. You know, how do you feel about it?
No, I'm somewhere in the middle like that, where I grew up a collector, obviously. So anytime there's like an old, like, you know, Vinegar Syndrome or Shout Factory releases something that I want, I'll still buy it, you know, because I want to own it and I want the special features. I want the remastered edition just to have, because movies don't stay on streaming services forever either. A lot of them get switched out and stuff. But for me, it's about convenience, and I feel like that's the point of streaming, because I got to a point as a collector in like the late 90s, early 2000s, where, you know, every couple of years when I'd move or whatever, I'd have boxes and boxes and boxes of movies and burned DVDs and all this ridiculous crap that I'm loading around, and I only watch one time. So it's like, do I really need a copy of everything I've seen? You know, like, it's to the point now where, like, streaming's fine. I'm going to watch it one time and probably forget about it in 3 days anyways. So I think it's perfect for what it is. I think that there's movies you want to own and there's movies that you want to passively watch. So it's good to have both.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good way to put it. And so with you, I felt bad because now I rented your movie on Amazon, but I should have went to your Vimeo. So let me put that out there. Everybody go check out direct to video, but do it on Dustin's Vimeo, so that way he can make the money. Absolutely, because I like to do that. I like to, especially when it comes to independent, like, if I can rent it to put something towards the filmmaker, I want to do that, you know.
No, for sure.
You know, even if it's on, like, say, let's Netflix, which very few and far between, and rare that a good indie film will be on Netflix, but for that, I will leave Netflix and I'll go and rent it, you know, because I don't want to put money towards the huge stuff anymore if I don't have to.
Right.
If it come out, but I'm rambling at this point. At this point, I just want to go back and I want to talk about direct to video a little bit more. So how long did it take you to shoot overall everything? Because that's a lot of interviews that you covered.
We had one main weekend where we did all of the interviews that took place in the office. And then it was just sort of sporadic after that. Like, this whole thing was honestly really ridiculous because, like you said, there's a lot of interviews. So, like, It was a lot. I'm not going to lie. It was a lot to orchestrate and working with people's schedules and running all over LA, like everywhere. There were days where I think we had one day where like the day we filmed with Clint Howard, where I was filming 3 other movies that day. So I was filming scenes for different projects. And then he was like our last stop. And so that's kind of how it ended up by the end of production, where it was like, well, can we squeeze in another interview this day? I'm going to be in LA. And so it was one main weekend and then maybe like 5 or 6 kind of off days where we did 1 or 2 interviews until the whole thing was done. And then I think I can't remember if that one had any self-shot interviews. I don't think it did. I think we pretty much did all of them, just kind of done that way.
Well, how did you map out what movies you wanted to, focus on in the film before you started, or was it kind of organic in a way where you were talking and they kind of came up?
It's a mixture of both. I find that editing can be very organic. When you start putting the footage together, it takes on a sort of flow. And so I didn't know the exact structure per se. I knew what information I wanted to give, what movies I wanted to talk about. And so I had like the same set of questions I asked everybody for this. It was just like, so A, B, and C, and then left room for them to elaborate. And something I didn't mention before is the initial cut of this was over 4 hours long. It was like 4.5 hours. And it was thorough. And the thing that actually got me to cut it down was, even though I feel like there's so much more information that, people could learn from it, I tend to notice that those longer documentaries, like the Freddy Krueger one and stuff, people will only watch one time. Because they don't want to sit down and invest another 5 hours into watching the whole thing again. But when you make it under 2 hours, it's a swift watch and people might put it back on replay. And I think that not only is that good for them, I think being a fan of the film, it's good for me as far as rentals go, if they're going to want to watch it more than once. And so it was very sort of, it was based on the movies I grew up on, in the 90s. Like I knew what ones I wanted to talk about. But then I sort of like created a structure starting with the beginning, like who were the pioneers, who were the people, like Full Moon and Trauma, and then what inspired those films and people that have worked on those projects that have gone on to do their own things, and sort of just kind of went through the 90s. And it's the same thing I did with the newest one with the Grindhouse films, Still Popcorn. I started like in the early 70s and work our way to the late 80s. I think that's just the best way to inform people and give out the information.
Oh yeah, that's one thing I really enjoyed about it, is like it seems very linear, and it's in the times that you cover. And finishing one of the films you talked about towards the end was Campfire Tales, which I love.
Oh my God, I love that movie so much.
I loved that movie when it came out, and that was one I remember working at Hollywood Video at the time, and we saw it. It was like new on the shelf, and I was like, I need to watch this. It was like Friday night. Me and my buddy go home and we watch it, and we're like, this movie's great. Like. And then I forgot about it. And now I have to go rewatch it. I wrote it down again. I'm like, I haven't seen this in forever.
That's what was sort of fun about making this was as going through the movies I want to talk about, of course, then I'm racking my brain, like, who do I know that's involved in these movies? And so it was like anytime I could find anybody related to anything in any way, I was like, all right, opportunity to talk about the movie. Let's get you in it, And so like Joe Castro had done some effects on that movie. I'm like, you've got to be in it. Then now I can talk about Campfire Tales. I just felt it was really necessary to cover those kind of movies.
Absolutely. And again, you picked great representatives of like through the time, like, starting off with Charles Band and Full Moon and, Lloyd and Trauma. Like you're right. They're the pioneers, and they came in from the 80s and hit direct to video so hard. And it worked in so many ways. So was that like your first time, like I talking to like Lloyd or I know you said you worked with a bunch of them before, so
Sure. I've worked with him a few times. I did a documentary in 2015 or 16 called Penny Pinchers: The Kings of No Budget Horror, and he was interviewed in that. And I actually worked in the booth right next to him at Comic-Con when I was working on Killer Tomatoes 2 years ago. And then that's when we set up this interview. And I worked on every other Grindsploitation film that they've put out, and I actually edited together and directed Grindsploitation Part 8. So I've got some ties to Trauma, and they've released a lot of my films over the years too.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's awesome. So like you going out and you have the Scream Queens in there, you have everybody. So I cannot gush over this movie enough. I just saw so many faces pop up, and I was so excited to see.
Well, I have to say that's exactly why I made this. Like hearing you say that's all I care about. Like even if I don't make any money on this, and I haven't yet, honestly, I think that it shows I'm doing it for the love, and to hear the fans say, "Oh my God," just like what you're saying, that's why I made it.
Well, I definitely did. I'm sitting there talking to my wife about it, who is not a huge horror fan, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh my God, you talked about this movie, and I was like, I remember renting this at Premiere Video in New Jersey, and I was just like, and she's like, that's really cool, but she didn't watch it with me yet, so I was like, you got to watch this movie. You don't understand what direct-to-video meant to young horror fans in the '90s, and you hit it well with the nostalgic feel of this doc.
Thank you.
And yeah, so I mean, fantastic. And I can't wait to check out the rest of your docs. I'm going all of your movies, but I definitely I love a good horror documentary, especially filmmaking horror documentary. So I'm gonna go right through all of them. I think on Shudder, when I first signed up for that, I just spent like 3 days on their horror documentary page. And like one of them was that Nightmare on Elm Street 4.5 hour movie, and then the Jason 6. So I have no problem.
Very inspirational, especially as a filmmaker. Like renting the Full Moon movies, they always had the Full Moon video zones at the end after Puppet Master. That would be like behind the scenes, and that's what made me a filmmaker. Was I would watch those more than the movie themselves, just like seeing how they did it, and how much fun they were having on set, and how cool it was, and they were creating these crazy things, this whole world. Like that's all I've ever wanted, and so that's what I'm trying to bring back.
Yeah. Especially when you talk about Puppet Master 3, which is the best one in my opinion.
Part 2 is my favorite, but I know everyone loves Part 3.
I do love Part 3 because it's like an epic scale of Puppet Master. Everybody's like, layman's are like, oh, Puppet Master, that's one of the best, and I'm like, yeah, you need to go down the line a little bit more. Because as great as that one is, and then it's all right. Like, go get to set 2 or 3 or 4. So for me, I have to ask you, and I'm not going to ask you for your ultimate favorite of the movies that you cover in your documentary, but what's the one that stood out to you? You were like, this needs to be in. I need to talk about this movie and, shout it from the rafters.
I would say that Full Moon for sure, because around that time I worked on the new Blade, the Iron Cross movie for Full Moon, and so that was sort of at the same time that I was working on this, and so I definitely have favoritism towards Full Moon movies, but also specifically I have to give a shout out like Dolly Dearest, because it's such an underrated movie. I'm obsessed with Dolly Dearest. I have every version of it released, and no one knows of it. People today are still like, "What is that?" And I'm like, "Are you serious?" And so that was real crucial for me to get that information out there, and also Ice Cream Man, because it was an opportunity, obviously, to talk with Clint Howard, who everybody knows, and it's a really underrated gem.
It really is. I can't talk about that movie enough. That's one that has always stuck with me because the Clint Howard is just so deranged in that movie and fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say, I just have to say thank you, Dustin, for coming on the show. It's such a great time, and I would love for you to come on and talk. Let's talk more about your movies.
That
would be. That. I had such a great time talking with you because you can tell you're such a real fan of the genre. But I like to end things on kind of a fun note, and I want to ask you, it's Halloween time. It's the spooky season. What's your top 5 you must watch during the Halloween season?
Ooh, during the Halloween season. Okay. Halloween 1, 2, and 3. I mean, come on. Like, if you're not watching those every year, you're not a Halloween fan. I highly recommend, I'll give a shout out to my buddy, Chris LaMartina, who made the WNUF Halloween special.
I just saw it. I was on, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off because I just got excited. I loved everything about it. And I was actually on Twitter like, come on, please be on the show. I want to talk to you about this movie. He was just, it was so good. And I was like, it reminded me of, what was that, Ghost Hunt?
Ghost Watch.
Ghost Watch, the BBC special they did back in the 90s. And I'm like, this is perfect. I was like, this reminds me exactly of what news was in the 80s.
Definitely. And I think people need to discover that because there's something, the nostalgic factor with that thing is what's big about it. I grew up, being obsessed with horror movies. I would always record movies on TV. So a lot of the movies I grew up watching had commercials in them. They're old 80s recordings. And watching that, actually inspired me a lot. I went and made 3 features that were similar, that were after school special movies that had fake commercial breaks set on Halloween. And that was, I just released that actually. It's the WXIP TV Channel 6 triple feature. So seek that out if you like
Yeah,
that.
100%. I'm watching that. Oh my God, that's so exciting. But yeah, WNUF that's a great choice. And I love that recommendation. And
then definitely I have to Night of the Demons. I worked on the new Night of the Demons. I co-directed the documentary for that. So I got to give a shout out to that too.
The new one was fun. I really enjoyed it. So and I haven't checked out the documentary, but I'm going to watch it now. Because Night of Demons is always one that, for me, like I found that in high school. So I found that later from when it came out, and I was just like, this is, how did I miss like 10 years of being able to watch this movie every year.
People are good too. You know, a lot of people only think there's the first movie, but they're all pretty decent.
Oh, you cover that too in your doc, which really works. Like I forgot again. It was just those movies that kind of come back in, and I'm like, I forgot how good that was. I forgot how much I enjoyed and like how I felt when I first watched that. And
like
their movie,
it's a lost era, you know, and people need to remember.
Absolutely, yeah, it did get lost in that. And as much as I like the movie Scream, it did get lost in that whole wave of teen horror movies that came out. Because there were some really fun ones that came out. And you cover it perfectly in your doc. Dustin, thank you so much. This is amazing. And now I can't wait to go check out the triple feature. I'm so excited for it. Because like things like that remind me of, like you said, taping horror movies and having, I will make my 8-year-old watch, partly because they're TV edited and, he's 8. So like I'll make him watch the horror movies on TV. And it's like, yeah, that's how I did it when I was a kid. That's how they were available.
That's awesome.
So I did show him the WNUF, and he loved that. So I'm thinking he's going to love your triple feature.
Oh yeah, and they're all super PG. It's just like that. They're like TV edit versions. Like they're really safe for kids.
Oh, that's awesome. I cannot wait to dive in and see everything. You have been fantastic. I love that you're a filmmaker. I mean, that inspires me. And so many. I love that you're a filmmaker who's charging through. I'm glad you're having a banner year this year, and you've put out so much content, because thank you for doing that, because you're looking out for the audiences.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, not everybody appreciates what I do, obviously, but I know that there are some that do, so it does mean a lot.
People, I think it comes down to real fans appreciate what you do. Like,
they do, and I hear it more and more every day. So. Yeah,
I'm gonna be writing up a review of direct to video. I can tell you it's very favorable. But like, just kind of like go through and like, because I always like to write up my write in my blogs, kind of like my feelings on it. And you definitely drew some out with this doc, and I think that's always important when it comes to any movie, especially a documentary. So thank you again. It was a fantastic watch. It was so much fun. I was so giddy to talk to you and have you on the show today.
Yeah, thank you again. I'm really glad you enjoyed the documentary. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And Dustin, do you have anything else that you want to promote right now? I know you have some stuff coming out, or your social media or anything like that.
Oh gosh. Well, you can just find me on Facebook under my real name, Dustin Ferguson. You can find me on Instagram as The Only Dirty D, which is my rap music profile. And then we have Arachnado, which is coming out on Thanksgiving, and obviously Stale Popcorn and Sticky Floors hits on Halloween.
Oh, it's Halloween. Okay, awesome. I can't wait to see it then. All right, fantastic. And if you want to come back on and talk about it, I'm always up for it. So thank you. Everybody go check it out. Go to the Vimeo, pay the man because he deserves it. They're fun. It's fun stuff. So until next time, I am the Scene Snob, Mick Manhattan. Go check us out on thescenesnobs.com. Subscribe to the channel and such, but you guys all know that. Thanks again, Dustin. I really appreciate this, and I will talk to you guys soon.
Thank you for having me.